Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israeli armed forces strike ISIS militants overnight. An Islamic group harassing Jews on the Temple Mount is indicted, and Prime Minister Netanyahu thanks foreign pilots who came to fight the fires in the Jewish state. I'm Aaron Porras here with the latest news in Israel. A great deal of the fighting in Syria's civil war is taking place just over Israel's northern border, and the Jewish state is keeping a close, watchful eye on the fighting. The Israeli Air Force pounded a military position on the Golan Heights overnight belonging to Islamic State terrorists. The army jets dropped 10 one-ton bombs on an abandoned military facility that was previously used by the UN, but was abandoned 2 years ago after fighters affiliated with ISIS kidnapped United Nations peacekeepers. The outpost has since been taken over by the terrorists and was used for training and to store arms near the border with Israel. Israel's actions early this morning came in retaliation to Sunday night's mortar and gunfire on an IDF unit. Soldiers were under fire with a heavy machine gun-mounted vehicle. The 4 terrorists committing the attack were all killed, according to the IAF report. The IDF stated that they intend to continue to protect the citizens of Israel and refuse to hesitate to act against any terrorist organization operating against the Jewish state. This is the first occasion that ISIS is known to have opened fire intentionally on IDF forces. There have been no reported injuries. Soldiers from the Israel Defense Forces are positioned in the Golan Heights frontier that separates the two nations of Israel and Syria, but the Islamic State isn't even the Israeli government's biggest concern. Greater dangers are being posed by errant mortar and tank fire that hits the Jewish state during combat between the Syrian army and rebel forces. Another major issue is the Hezbollah terror group's movement of heavy weapons from Syria into Lebanon, which also borders Israel to the north.
כרגע אנחנו לא בראש הסדר העדיפויות שלהם. אני מתכוון אני מדבר הצבא הישראלי. ולכן אנחנו לא מעריכים שכרגע עומדת להתבצע כנגדנו התקפה.
Although no direct attacks on the Jewish state appear to be imminent, fleets of tanks remain on standby while soldiers conduct routine patrols of the area as part of their constant Syrian reconnaissance. Israel holds the Assad regime responsible for any violations of its sovereignty and responds to any spillover violence with targeted counterstrikes as a matter of official policy. The head of the Israeli Army's Military Intelligence Division is advising the nation to prepare for another wave of Arab terror attacks that could possibly be ignited by rising frustrations over Palestinian leadership issues. Major General Herzl Halevi says that the power struggle within the Palestinian Authority is going to intensify this coming year as even more contenders show up to challenge Mahmoud Abbas's hold on the presidency. And that's more than likely to lead to even more instability in the West Bank than the tenuous situation it's already in. Halevi told a closed conference in Tel Aviv University that this can have serious ramifications on the Jewish residents of Judea and Samaria, who are likely targets of increasing terrorist attacks. The military intelligence chief said that even though the fire terrorism witnessed in the country this past week can be stamped out, the Arab terrorists will come up with new ways to attack the Jewish state. On a positive note, Halevi says that Israel has an increasing number of common interests with regional Sunni Muslim states, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which present an opportunity to improve relations. The High Court has come under considerable criticisms from ministers and Knesset members alike for its alleged interventionist policies. But according to the Movement for Quality Government, the current court is not activist at all. Attorney Michael Partem told ILTV's Steve Leibowitz that much of the criticism is unjustified and politically motivated.
Is the Supreme Court justly under attack?
No. The Supreme Court is, part of the attacks have to do with an attempt to influence the Supreme Court, to try to keep the Supreme Court in check. And to a certain extent, and occasionally they're successful. We do not have an extremely activist Supreme Court. In the past, we've had more activist Supreme Courts. The number of pieces of legislation that are overturned or nullified is really quite small. You can count them, over the decade, on the fingers of one hand.
The Supreme Court has ordered that Amona be evacuated by December 25th. Some of the right-wing Knesset members, right-wing parties, and including ministers, are trying to now come up with a law that bypasses and in fact undercuts this Supreme Court ruling. Is this a dangerous phenomenon?
Well, it remains to be seen. It's not a dangerous phenomenon that the Knesset wants to enact a law or to change the legislative landscape with new legislation. The Knesset is the sovereign and it expresses the will of the people. And in that respect, we don't want to detract from what the Knesset is able to do. The Supreme Court is there in certain extreme instances to keep other branches of government from going, to the extreme. So it remains to be seen whether this legislation will actually do damage to the appearance that it's trying to circumvent the Bagatz, the Supreme Court, or in fact is just an attempt by the Knesset at new legislation, which is certainly legitimate. And that the test will be, I think, and there's a lot of discussion on this point, whether this legislation will be retroactive or just going forward. If it's retroactive, that would appear to be more of a stab at the Supreme Court.
Part of what this law is going to be doing, in effect, is declaring that illegal outposts, which are sitting on privately owned Arab land, can keep that land. The land will, in effect, be taken away from the rightful owners, handed over to the Jewish settlers who are there, even by Supreme Court definition, illegally at this point. And isn't that something which will open Israel up to all sorts of international law criticism, and not to mention how we look at ourselves?
I think when you have a certain political position, the answers are clear-cut. If you're just looking strictly at the legal position, we have two hands, the lawyers, so we have, you can always, if it would be, I would say, almost unthinkable that there wouldn't be a number of possible positions that one could take to either justify or unjustify or condemn, certain as a legal position. So, and these do seem to be really complex issues involving local law, international law, what the status of the territories, of the status of Judea-Samaria, or the territories as you call them, I would not like to. Because I'm vice chairman of the Movement for Quality Government, I wouldn't want to venture in a position on this, and so people would think that this is the position of the movement. I think, people in the movement come with a broad spectrum of political opinions, but when we get into the movement and we concentrate on doing the business of the movement, which is why I think we've been able to attract such support from all parts of the political spectrum.
Okay, Michael Parham, thanks so much for being with us at ILTV.
You're very welcome.
Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City have long been targeted by Muslims who shout down and try to intimidate them. But not to worry, Israel is fighting back. It's just been announced for publication that 4 senior members of a banned Islamic network have been indicted for active involvement and fundraising for the harassment campaign at the Temple Mount. The suspects are being charged with conspiracy to commit a felony, membership in an illegal organization, illegal use of property for terrorist purposes, and money laundering. They were arrested by the Shin Bet Security Agency over the past 2 months for belonging to the group, which was outlawed last year for deliberately provoking unrest at the holy site. The Muslim activists are actually paid to travel to Jerusalem from all over Israel just to try to frighten Jewish visitors into staying away from the holiest site in Judaism. Prosecutors say that since being banned, the group meets in open spaces to avoid being wiretapped, and that they also succeeded in raising nearly $200,000 before being caught. Israel's culture and sports minister Miri Regev is angry over a competition on a Russian reality TV program that included skaters dressed in concentration camp uniforms and tagged with yellow stars of David. The matter is a bit sensitive because the wife of Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesman was one of the performers. But Cultural Minister Miri Regev doesn't care. In a radio interview, she made it clear that, quote, Holocaust themes are not for parties, they are not for dancing, and they are not for reality shows, end quote. Regev says that any attempts to present the Holocaust in that way are inappropriate and absolutely unacceptable. Regev stressed that none of the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust were dancing, and the Nazi prisons were certainly not summer camps. The spokesman's wife who participated in the popular show is Tatiana Navka, who was once an Olympic figure skating medalist, and the 4-minute performance was accompanied with music by Israeli singer Achinoam Nini. Joining me in the studio today is Ran Bar Yoshafat, pro-Israel activist and author of I Flew to Speak About Israel, to discuss some of the current events around the world and their influence on Israeli PR. Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, so you have spent quite a bit of time touring around United States campuses and speaking to the student body, etc. With pro-Israel advocacy and answering questions. What do you think is the overall image of Israel, held in these places?
Okay, so I think it's really important to understand that in America and in all of the world in general, most people don't wake up and say, hey, what's going on in Israel? Most people are either apathetic or actually pro-Israel. There are certain areas, certain cells, mainly on college campuses, where you can find groups that are super critical of Israel. You can find it mainly in the Pacific Northwest, the UCs, a little bit in the Midwest. And these are a very small target of people, but they have a lot of voice. You can hear them very often in these areas, and they have a strong impact.
So it changes, does it change dramatically from one campus to the next?
It does. Usually when the environment itself is a little bit more tilted to the progressive side, I would argue you will find people who are more anti-Israel.
Okay. Now, so then when you had some anti-Israel, advocates coming towards you and speaking, were they speaking from a position of knowledge, or were they speaking from a position of, they're parroting things that they may have heard?
Great question. So there are professors who are knowledgeable about Israel and the conflict. A lot of the Jewish community, which is unfortunately a big part of the anti-Israel campaign, are knowledgeable about Israel. But without a doubt, the vast majority are people who just memorize arguments against Israel, and they have no idea what's going on. And usually their arguments they're not connected to the reality that is happening here.
So, okay, do you think that the root of Israel's poor image problem lies with Israelis', lack of public relations, or, are their policies explained poorly? Are their policies indefensible? For example, Israel has, after they came out against, in the Six-Day War, and they retook the West Bank. It has been nearly 50 years since then, and there hasn't been a clear policy set forth for what is to be done with that area. So, that's how do you explain that to people?
Well, I would argue that the root of our problem is our existence. Meaning, when you see people chant, they chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. After '67, Israel actually had a huge support from all over the world. So I would doubt if it's because of the policy. If someone would go and protest because of Israel's policies in Judea and Samaria, I'd be like, okay, it's a little bit odd because I can think of 1 million better reasons, causes to fight for, but okay, I can accept that, but that's not what's happening. People are protesting against the bare existence of Israel. Now, it's okay to be critical of our policies, that's fine. I would argue if Israel will have a stronger policy, most of the world would actually appreciate it. Maybe not progressive world Jewry, but the vast majority of the world still uses terms of real politics, meaning you want to know where the country stands on and how it works. Israel became a hot topic much later after the Six-Day War. So I don't think it's about the Israeli policies. I would even go further to say most people don't really know about the policies that is happening in Israel. I would even say most college students wouldn't know where Israel is on a map.
All right, so moving on to a little bit more, positive things. The United States has passed, many different independent states, universities, etc., have passed anti-BDS legislation. is this going far enough? Is the United States doing enough to aid in, kind of evening the playing field?
Well, first we need to understand what does it mean to have anti-BDS legislation. As a side note, I would say I really don't like the term BDS. I like to call them the movement to destroy Israel, because that is exactly what they're saying in their platform. But let's use their term just for this interview.
Okay.
You're allowed to boycott Israel. I cannot force someone not to boycott. If you're a vegetarian, you're boycotting beef product. That's fine. The thing is that you need to understand that if you're boycotting a country that's, I would say, the United States' =1 ally, or America is our =1 ally, then you're not working with your state, and that's not something positive. So you need to understand that the anti-BDS legislation would change the discourse, meaning people will understand that they're not jumping on the right bandwagon. They're just saying something that's not positive. They can still boycott Israel. They won't get tax benefits because they're working.
Right.
They're undermining their own government. So that's something very negative. So I would say that's the biggest impact of the anti-BDS legislation. I can also say that the BDS movements, the BDS activists are worried about that because they know that that's going to make it more harder for them to act.
So doesn't that fall back onto, educational platforms and kind of how the Middle East, and especially with respect to Israel, things are being taught and promoted? Because when you have all these people who are, anti-Israel, it more often than not comes from a position of, misinformation.
100%. The number one thing to do here is to educate people. It can be to educate Jews for their Jewish identity and tell them to come to Israel to learn and see for themselves. It can be for the non-Jewish community to come and explore Israel, and if they criticize Israel, maybe they should take a look and see what is happening here, not just from a YouTube video, but to actually come and see, and then you get a real broader picture. It can be sending Israelis to college campuses, which is happening a lot more today.
Okay.
You have different organizations. I'm a fan of Stand With Us because they send me for a long-term to be an emissary for Israel, and you go to one school and the other and you educate people about Israel. So there are many programs, and I think that without a doubt that is the best thing to do. It's also, by the way, not a new concept. That's how you change people's mind. You need to educate them so they'll have all of the information, and then they can shape out their mind, and it can be more pro, more anti, maybe, just critical, which is fine. I would argue more education, you'll become more pro-Israel.
So that actually brings me to my next question then. If, what groups, you mentioned Stand With Us. Other than that, how many groups are there? What groups would you advocate are really on the forefront of, pro-Israel advocacy?
Well, there's so many, actually. I think it's a real growing phenomenon. Stand With Us are doing an excellent job at college campuses. I can take Shurat Adin, for example. It's an organization that sues terrorists that are hurting innocent civilians, be it Israeli civilians or American civilians, and they're trying to trace down the money and say you need to compensate because you murdered people. You have so many organizations on college campuses. I would even say every Jewish federation has like a Israel advocacy part where they try to put efforts into. And also within Israel, you have Ha'emet Sheli and Miluimnikim B'Chazit, and you have the person that came after me to Seattle, Chen Mezig, is doing pretty much the same thing that I did now also in Europe. It's growing. You also have non-Jews doing that, like the Forum to Draft the Christian Community in Israel. They're also flying abroad and saying, look, we're Christian Arabs and we're saying that Israel is a great place and what you're saying about Israel is just factually wrong. So it's really, really growing. A lot of people are becoming more active. I think mainly because it bothers you when people are bashing your country and they're not criticizing, they're bashing. They're not saying I disagree with this policy. They're saying, we don't want you to exist. They're chanting intifada, intifada, which means they want innocent civilians to be blown up. And they're like, whoa, we're not okay with that.
All right. Well, on that note, I would urge everybody listening to, to look up some of these advocacy groups and become involved. And thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. During the last week, while fires raged in the country, Israel asked for and received assistance from many different places. Huge firefighting planes arrived from Russia, a giant supertanker made it from the United States, and smaller planes came from Spain, Turkey, Greece, and France. All of the pilots and their planes played an incalculably important role in fighting the blazes, and now Prime Minister Netanyahu met with some of these visiting pilots to thank them for their efforts.
Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you for coming here.
No need for thanks.
We do, and we thank you. Thank you. Who pilots all of them?
Some pilots, some flying technicians, some landing technicians. They came here as sustainable as we could for crews so that we can rotate. To help you as much as you need.
Terrific. Thank you. It's a good sign of a great friendship, and we appreciate it a lot. Thank you. Shalom. 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 Thank you. Shalom. 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 What do you do?
I'm a pilot.
You're a pilot?
Yes.
One of these things?
Yes.
Bombardier?
Yes.
Did you go into the city, into built-up areas yet?
We were on Haifa today.
But did you actually throw water into buildings?
Yes, behind buildings.
Behind buildings?
Yes.
Was it, where's the captain?
The captain is the first one.
First I said,
Who's the captain?
is it hard to throw water in the buildings in Haifa?
Well, sir, it's not hard, but
Dangerous?
our philosophy is this. If there is a tarmac and there are houses in the vicinity, that this should be done by the ground forces, except if the lives of the inhabitants are in danger. Because when you wage the risk, if there are no lives in danger, it is a little bit careless to drive the airplanes through the building.
Because you could crash.
Not because of that, but you can maybe crash the windows, and somebody who will not be injured by the fire can be injured by the fragments of the glass.
Okay. But you can be above the building.
Yes. You can
be above the building.
You can pilot through the streets if necessary.
Okay.
But when you wage the risk,
Okay.
why do you want to pilot through the street
I don't want
if
to.
you
I want
can
to come
drive
above.
the truck?
No, but
Yes.
you mean that the water will break the glass and then
Yes,
people will be
yes,
injured from
yes,
the glass.
Maybe,
مش
maybe.
كاسة مية.
You have to wage. You have to wage the risk.
So if
the,
there's a way
the risk is big,
to send the
no problem.
firefighters inside, it's
Yes.
much better.
So, can I go in one of these planes with you?
Yes, sir. Please do.
How much is a bombardier?
What's sir?
How much does a bombardier cost?
It was $25 million.
$25 million one? One of them.
מה? כמה עולה אחד?
One.
The largest Jewish nonprofit organization in the world is now stepping up to help out Israeli families who can't return home because of damage wrought by the devastating fires that raged across the Jewish state this week. ILTV's Natalie Tversky has more on the story.
Officials at the Jewish Agency for Israel announced that every eligible family will be given $1,000 of emergency funding. The agency's director, Natan Sharansky, says that at trying times like these, world Jewry feels closely connected to what is taking place in Israel and comes to help without hesitation. He expressed pride and gratitude toward the agency's partners in Jewish communities around the world, especially the United States and Canada. All of the financial assistance for the families is being contributed by the Jewish Federations of North America. In addition, Israel's Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon has approved a stipend to be provided by Israeli funds of about $650 to each person displaced by the blazes. About 80,000 Israelis were forced to flee their homes during 6 days of the inferno, which damaged over 1,000 homes and burned 32,000 acres of land. It now looks like at least a third of the 110 separate fires were deliberate arson attacks by Arabs, who set them for political purposes.
Masa Israel is home to the widest variety of immersive international experiences for Jewish young adults 18 to 30. Find the right study abroad internship, service learning, or Jewish studies program to help you grow as a person, a professional, and a leader, while also developing a robust global professional network that includes Israelis and Jews from around the world. And now for the Hebrew word of the day. We've been talking a lot about the fires that spread through Israel recently and how they've finally, thankfully, started to cool off. So today's word is kerach, meaning ice. Kerach is a pretty useful word in every language since we use it in so many ways. You can put a couple cubes of kerach in your drink, you can scrape kerach off of your windshield, I'm thinking of you, Northern Hemisphere, and you can even put your emotions on kerach, which is good, since they can often override your better judgments and turn us cold as kerach. So next time you're feeling hot-blooded, hot-headed, or just plain hot, remember to chill, pun intended, and be cool as kerach. let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. ILTV's weather forecast is sponsored by Adopt a Savta, taking care of Israel's lonely Holocaust survivors. Tonight will be partly cloudy and windy with a low of 60 or 16 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow should have a high of 77 or 25 degrees Celsius and will be partly cloudy with a chance of rain. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.86 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching and see you tonight.